Alrighty, welcome back to the Information Revolution. We're here at episode number 44, which is half the number of keys on a piano, is my trivia for this episode. My name is Michael Upton, and I'm an information management consultant in Wellington, New Zealand.
And my name is Judi Vernau. I'm an information architect and I'm also in Wellington, New Zealand.
And I'm Karl Melrose. I'm an information and records management consultant based in Adelaide. And we have a very special guest today, or an interloper. I haven't figured out which yet, but time will tell.
Yeah, we'll give the rest of the session to decide. My name's Adrian Kearns. I'm a solution architect based in Wellington, New Zealand.
Fantastic. Why don't we open by just actually getting you to tell us what architects do?
Yeah.
So there's a couple of different definitions. One is they just sort of draw boxes, or they're quite good at being up an ivory tower and being irrelevant. It's a little bit harsh. So if a slightly flippant definition, which is probably quite accurate, is that there's someone who knows where all the holes are in the middle of the road, so you can avoid them, when you're doing delivery and so forth. The more proper formal definition would be of architecture is that you're defining the components that the system's going to be composed of, and allocating the different roles and responsibilities to those. But you're not really defining the internals. You're just saying what the overall structure is, the different rules by which things might communicate, and the different roles and responsibilities. And usually you'll involve one, maybe more architectural styles, which is where some of those components might be predefined for you and might be orientated towards some particular set of non-functional requirements. Because the other part of the job is taking the technical constraints that you've got and the organizational constraints and what the business need, and trying to figure out what sort of a solution is going to work for them, going to address the functional needs and the non-functional needs. Did that confuse you enough?
Sounds like we should be coming to you next time we need a records management system.
Well, I wouldn't be a bad place to start. Yes.
Do you normally show up when someone's about to procure a new system, or when do you normally engage a solution architect?
So it depends. If you ask an architect any question, the first words out of their mouth should be, "It depends." So if you're a permanent architect in like a government department or something like that, then yes, you can be brought in quite early, pre-business case, and you can do some of that big blue sky thinking. If you're in a bigger organization like a government department, there might be enterprise architects that are trying to figure out, the bigger sort of the plan. The metaphor that works for enterprise architecture is thinking about town planning. You're not really architecting individual buildings, you're setting out, sort of zoning and stuff like that. So as a solution architect, you are normally put onto a specific project to deliver a specific solution that actually does something material for people. And in that case, yes, you can be brought in, pre-business case early on. In my role at Middleware New Zealand, which is the firm I'm at, we're a consulting firm, and I'm often put out as sort of the fire brigade. So in the consulting space, you generally get a consultant architect, and if you had a very specific need, sort of high impact kind of a thing going on, and so fighting fires is something that often I'm brought in to do. You might have a big project that's up and running. They might have hit some turbulence. Maybe the architecture wasn't well done initially or something like that, and so you might come in after the fact. So architects aren't always engaged early. Sometimes they are engaged late. Just I imagine it's probably the same for in your sphere, where there's varying degrees of when you're brought in.
Yeah, I just picking up on that, and I always say it would be so great if we could do the information architecture side of it before there's any thought about the technology. But it so rarely happens. And as far as I can see, or in my experience, the ideal would be the information architect and the technical architect, if I can call you that, absolutely taking this journey together. But it so rarely happens. So
Absolutely.
It's interesting that you were talking about firefighting being something that you often do. So clearly something's gone wrong somewhere. And And would you tend to find that that's something that's gone wrong because of, I don't know how to describe this, but like a bit of coding or something, or is it that the fundamental design isn't right?
It will
If
usually
you
be
can
something,
generalize.
usually be something fundamental. So, like all roles, architects have different levels of experience and have their own set of biases and that sort of thing. One of the problems that architects or teams might have is they might, sort of rush to a solution. So rather than taking time to understand the problem, and when I say understand the problem, it's taking the context into consideration. So what's the existing technology landscape that you've got, which means, what staff do you have already in the organization? What skills do they have? What's its level of maturity for delivering solutions? All that sort of that soft stuff, that all plays into that. So if you've got people that have already got their heart set on a technology because it's the new bells and whistles, it might not address the problem, or
Yeah.
it might require a bunch of skills that they just don't have. It might require a bunch of infrastructure and background supporting stuff that they just don't have. There's all sorts of big ticket items that might be missing. Before you even get around to figuring out how it's actually going to address the problem that the business has got. So,
Yes. Yeah. I mean, one thing that I've found is that the techie people usually, obviously, they're focused on the technology, but also on process, very much on processes. And how, yeah, well, and how the users carry out those processes. But quite often, the poor old content itself kind of gets sidelined somehow. They're not really thinking about what the information itself is and what it needs, if I can put it like that. So I don't know, yeah, if you've found that or if you think about it in that way at all.
so there's all sorts of competing concerns. So, and there's different strata to that. So, I mean, at a place where I've been at recently, there's a whole lot of different projects that are being put forward, but the amount of work that has to be done, the amount of projects that need to be done is greater than the capacity and the budget that they have.
Right.
So not only can all the work not necessarily get done, but the order in which it gets done has an impact on what happens next. So when you go to do a given project or deliver a particular solution or architect a particular solution, some of the decisions you make are influenced by what else is going live. So I've been in positions where we're trying to architect a solution that will be customer facing, but they don't have any customer identity and access management. So it's like, okay, well, do we put something tactical in or should we put a strategic solution in? But of course, that's more time,
Yeah.
scope, and money. So you've got that level of thing. And then even once you're within a project, to your point, you've got all these different aspects and they're all vying for your attention. It's like the technology and the infrastructure and the networking and then the application and the software stack and then the data itself. But it's usually for information management. The information is usually relatively more important, I find, if you're doing system replacement, because there's usually a business owner or a team that are currently looking after, meaning business people who are currently using the solution that you're going to replace, and they do care about what that's going to look like when it's
Yeah,
replaced,
sure.
and they do care about the data. But I mean, even then, there can be swings and roundabouts.
I guess the question that occurs to me there is, I mean, you raised a really good one. The sort of trade offs between short and long term objectives,
Mm.
and I think one of
Mm.
my critiques that I'm sure I've made, of records and information management is that we don't tend to have a view on maturity. We don't tend to think in terms of like current state and a future state that might be 10 or plus years down the road, and then sort of like transition states through that. We tend to think about things as, well, law says we must implement policy that does the law, and if it doesn't work because it's too big a jump at once, well, I mean, we can't do a lot about that. I guess I'd be really interested, because it sounds like you've dealt with that kind of problem a bit. I'd be interested in how you think about that project and how you think about that problem and how you think about the trade offs that you've got to make there. And is there anything that you think is, I guess, what are the hard lessons that you wish you'd learned earlier?
I don't know. Some will probably come to me. They, well, I think on the other side, um, one of the common debates is around the tactical versus the strategic. So if you've got a business group that need a solution now because they're suffering pain right now, like it's not an academic discussion, you could put something tactical in, but the big argument against that is, okay, the moment you put something tactical in and you relieve the pressure, then there's no case to replace it anymore because you've removed the problem. Was it someone once said, well, never waste a good emergency or something like that. So, and I have seen that used positively where, things need to be replaced, but people can't put a date on when something's going to expire, and so nothing ever happens. There's a famous story that I think it was Mark Rees from Trade Me or Zero made years ago, where they needed to do some data sharding, something around the infrastructure that was long term. It was just not going to sustain. It was going to break, but they didn't know when. And because they couldn't say when it was going to break, nothing happened. So in the end, they just they just came up with an arbitrary date. Oh, this date it's going to explode, even though there was no sort of facts behind that. But on the basis of them drawing a line in the sand, then something happened. So you can use stuff positively in that way. But it is always a debate. The business is in pain now. We've gotten something tactical we could do, which would relieve the pressure. But then would that scuttle a more strategic solution, which would provide more benefit in the long term, assuming you even get there? And there's a problem there with long-term projects because the longer term something is to deliver, the more chances there are that you're not going to get to the end. Because the moment you get a change in senior leadership, direction changes, and what was priority 1 minute, it gets cast on the dump the next. I'm not sure if that answered your question.
No. I mean, it did. It was a good view of how to think about lots of bits of it. That the short and long term piece has always been something that I think about because there is, aside from the technical issues, I mean, there is a tremendous power in a sense of progress psychologically. And sometimes, if you give people, I've seen people grinding away on big change programs for years and never feeling like they're achieving anything. And I've seen people go away and do one tactical thing and come away with a sense of achievement and get some momentum out of it and really do something. And
Absolutely.
I don't know about you, but I think I've hit that point where nobody ever brings me the easy problems anymore. So
Yes.
I tend to always get stuck with the hard stuff. And thinking about tactical and strategic problems, I mean, if I could I would almost pay someone, to bring me a tactical problem that I could solve quickly at 9 o'clock every morning so that I could get a sense of, progress in my day.
Absolutely.
The grind.
Yeah, I do get the sense that any step forward you make towards progress, even if it's small, as long as it's heading in the right direction, then you've got to be doing the right thing. The thing that's related to the whole long term thing is, and it's going to sound really trite, but one of the important roles of the architect is to help sort of set a vision and get consensus. So, in my experience, I've seen architects come in and just sort of railroad solutions through over the objections of the team and other people. Um, and that doesn't work. They don't get consensus. And then the moment they leave, people just start actively pulling apart their solution because they didn't want it in the first place. If you can find consensus and set up a vision that people buy into, then that's good because you can step back. It's like one of your jobs is to do yourself out of a job. So if you can come in and set a vision, get the project heading in the right direction and get people bought into that and then step back from it, well then, that should continue on. It might change its course, but at least you've got them going in the right direction, and that's something you can claim victory on.
Yeah, I think that's one of the real, I guess, we come to this podcast every week or every fortnight to talk about the hard stuff that we're dealing with. And, that's where it really came out of, just trying to wrestle with some of the problems we're dealing with every day. And I think that strategic vision piece is one of the areas where, records management in particular could really do some work, because we always the organisations I've worked in, we always seem to approach it as almost like this dustbuster type thing. We're running around after people trying to vacuum up their records. Whereas I've always felt like there is a much bigger strategic conversation to be had about, what is this capability that we are trying to embed in our business, and what can we build on that capability once it's there. And
Mm-hmm.
I think this is where, I think the electron, the ECM kind of ideas, about cohesive management of structured and unstructured data, and having those capabilities available with
Yeah.
good metadata and those things so you can build services off them. I feel like that's a trick that we've really missed. And just the way you're talking about it, I feel like that's the kind of work that, maybe what this says is we should be trying to bring more architects into our records management program so that,
And vice versa, perhaps.
yeah, maybe
Definitely.
didn't
And
think about that.
and just to emphasise on that, I think the key there would be people who bring architectural thinking. They don't have to be architects per se. There doesn't have to be someone with architect in their job title, but just someone who can think, in an architectural way.
Yeah, I often think that organizations they don't have time a lot of the times, but to just set those fundamental principles. We've said strategy, that sounds quite sort of big and grand and maybe a bit too difficult for some people to think about, but surely it's possible to come up with some basic underlying principles about what it is we're trying to do here that can then carry into whichever bit of tactics we're doing.
Absolutely. So I've got two things to say to that. Let's see if I can not forget either of them. So the first is around patterns, and then
Hmm.
the second was it's already escaped me. Might come back anyway. So with a lot of problems that you come across, the first thing you should ask yourself is, well, has anyone had this problem before? Because chances are you're not going to be the first. And I think that's the thing that would distinguish a good architect from someone who's not an architect. Is the first thing they will do is they would look to see where's this been done before, or look for existing art. Um, not to bash on developers because I used to be one, but the typical response from like a junior or an intermediate developer would be to crack open a code editor and start writing something from scratch. So yeah, and so what was it you were saying again? Because we're just sort of at risk of losing it.
I was saying about having some underlying fundamental principles that
Yes,
you could wheel out, wherever they were needed,
yes, that's right.
just to get that consistency and an approach where you're doing it bit by bit, but there is an agreed approach. Was my point.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm sure there's principles in information management that you guys use all the time. There's similar principles, I think, in enterprise architecture and architecture more general. There's If you're talking about software, then there's software design patterns. If you're talking about architecture, including integration, there's different design patterns in those different spheres. And the other point, which I do remember now, was when you're looking at that sort of stuff, there can be a tendency or a bit of a trap to go and look at developing some principles, and then then you start looking at the current state, and then you start getting to this big analysis exercise, and then before you know it, you've spent 8 months.
Yeah.
The pragmatic bit of advice that I've received ages ago and try to always keep in mind is you want to try and focus on the future state as much and as quickly as you can. If let's say you're coming for a 6-month engagement, you don't want to spend the first 5 months looking at the current state because you're not really going to advance the organization. And what will happen is, the engagement will fall over, or they'll have made some superficial progress, but then like in a year's time, they're back in the same boat, and then they'll get someone else in, and they'll just rediscover all the stuff that you've already discovered. And I have seen that on occasion. So you still need to consider the current state, and so thinking about the current state and principles and that sort of thing, that's really good. It's just you need to be pragmatic and not sort of overbake it. You don't want to lose sight of actually, you don't want to forget to do the job. You're there and come up with the future state and the transition states that Karl was talking about. But I think your point is well made, though, Judi.
I mean, direction of travel as much as anything, isn't it? And I think that's while you've been talking, what I've been reflecting on is, something that we've touched on before, which is really about abstractions and how you work with them, and architecture. I mean, I guess like all of these things, records management and information management, we spend our entire lives working with metadata. It's an abstraction of the thing. It's an abstraction of the thing that actually makes our work possible and manageable, because we don't have to deal with every single possible state of reality. We get to constrain reality so that it's this big instead of being the whole world. And, once we do that, we can start to look in coherent ways at, the second, third, fourth, fifth order impacts of the things that we're doing. And I mean, it sounds to me like by the time we're thinking architecturally, we're really thinking, it sounds like, there's a trap in doing a really rigorous current state assessment and then a really rigorous future state assessment and trying to plot concretely all the steps in between them.
Sure.
But it also sounds like, it sounds like you want to set that direction of travel quickly as much as anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. One of the key things I think you're trying to do with architecture is you're trying to get the decisions right that are going to be really hard or expensive to correct later if you get them wrong.
Yep. Something that's just sort of tripped my mind as well is, where would you separate architecture and engineering? And I suppose, Judi, this is probably a question for the two of you. It's something that's actually been on my mind over the last couple of days with some challenges I'm working through. How would you separate architecture and engineering?
And can I just ask you to clarify what you mean by engineering?
I was hoping that you'd do that for me.
Are you seeing that as a difference between building architects and builders? Would that be analogous to what you're thinking, Karl?
No, I mean, I'm trying really hard not to kind of answer the question before.
Okay. All right.
Before Adrian does, or you do, Judi, because I already know what I think.
Let's see what Adrian's got to say.
Yeah,
gosh.
I don't think it's a right or wrong answer situation. Like, I think it's a multi-perspective situation, and I'm just really interested in, your perspective on it.
So the distinction between architects and engineering.
Yeah, or architects and engineers, generally, because I think that's I guess part of the thing that's driving the question is that I think often we don't recognise the difference, and I think it creates. I think it creates problems in the work we do. It's sort of like we, as a professional group, we don't recognise that there is there is a difference between people who come from an archival science background to records management, and people who think about records management, information management, libraries, knowledge management. Just because there's information involved in each one of those doesn't mean that they think the same way about the world. And I feel like we were talking about this, the last episode, I think we often make the mistake of, I was going to say, the whole untouchables thing of, knife to a gunfight, but it's not knife to a gunfight. It's, we bring a Phillips head screwdriver when we need a flat blade, or, we bring a chisel when we need a, hammer, or, if someone's got an agricultural metaphor, we bring a plow when we need a grader or something. I don't know.
So to answer your question, so there's all sorts of different distinctions. So, in terms of the purpose and why someone's coming to work, an engineer is there to build something and to get something produced. So what an engineer wants is they want a problem clearly defined. They want the tools that they need to address that, and then they just want to sit down and they just want to churn it out. That's what they want. They don't really want to be confronted with ambiguity and then have to sort of hum and ha and do the whole visualization thing. In an ideal world, they'd like to have something handed to them that's well defined that they can just do. as opposed to an architect, you'd be quite comfortable dealing with ambiguity. You'd be quite happy being given like a big ball of mud and teasing that apart and trying to figure out what's the actual problem that you're trying to deal with and that kind of thing. There's a few golden rules. Don't ask me what the other two are just at the moment, but the first one was, you got to really understand, what's the problem you're there, what's the problem you're trying to solve. So if ever I'm in a meeting and the conversation starts going off the rails, then either to myself or perhaps out aloud out to the room, I ask that question, just bring it back to what's the problem here that we're trying to solve. The other thing, I guess, about architects is I guess you're just sort of more imbued with that sort of way of thinking, thinking a bit more open-ended and being comfortable with that kind of ambiguity. Whereas, I guess, in comparison, engineers, this is generalization. I guess it's tend to be slightly less experienced, but that's not correct. So I do know engineers who are super experienced, and they are probably better architects as a developer than some architects I know. So
Yeah.
you can't sort of generalize. So I guess part of it might also be sort of personalities and the kind of problems that you like solving. Because my guidance to anyone who was considering being an architect is like, well, what sort of problems do you like solving? Um, so if you like solving hands-on problems, then maybe engineering's your thing. If you can get a taste for doing design and architecture and talking to people who don't know what they want and helping them trying to figure that out, and if you like herding cats, then maybe architecture is the thing for you. And just the one last thing which I want to mention, it's interesting is that the transition between those. So there's been a couple of people. One guy in particular sticks out where he was doing the transition from a team lead to a solution architect, and so in his capacity as team lead, very focused on specific technologies, exactly how they worked, and helping developers. So if you've got like a senior dev and they've got a technical problem they can't solve, he'd be the guy to help solve it. So very much hands-on, very much working with the team, very much in the detail, on the concrete tools. And then so he was coming in to sort of backfill my role as a solution architect on an established project. And it was a complete mind shift for him. And I think it took him at least 3 months to sort of to start making that shift. Because what I noticed would happen is a problem would come up and either he would immediately start attacking sort of, the tech lead technical sort of software side to it, ignoring the other dimensions to it. Or if a technical problem came up with the team, he would sort of rush to that when he should have just have been saying, "Sorry guys, that's your problem. I can't help you with that anymore." He would let himself get sort of pulled back, and so it definitely took 3 months before he even started making that adjustment.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit everything that, I've really thought about this. I mean, it sounds to me like, particularly that last piece, it's really thinking about the broad picture and thinking about, are we going in the right direction still? Is this taking us off track? We've had this problem. We need to do something to manage it. But can we keep going in the same direction? Does it change the goal? Whereas it sounds like, the engineering piece, it's narrow and deep. I mean, it's complicated versus complex problems, I think, in some ways. And it sounds as well like problems that involve value judgments versus problems that involve technical skills. And Michael, you've got your hand up
I
because
wish,
you're
I
late.
wish, I wish you'd participate more, Michael. Judi and Karl are carrying the load here.
Marines come all the way over here, and
I'm struggling. I'm struggling with lag for those watching this after the fact. Maybe I'll edit this out. Um, what I wanted to comment on is just Adrian, you mentioned about the golden rule around, what is the problem that we're trying to solve? And I'm sure we've brought that up in the context of our podcast, but I just kind of wanted to note that, that's already something really interesting to think about in the information space. Like, to what extent am I asking myself that or asking others that in my day job? Because I think it's all too easy to think, well, I'm just here to do this kind of random set of things that, or not
Totally,
a random set, but you know what I mean, like a fixed set of things that I'm expecting
absolutely.
from myself and my role, and actually getting to the guts of, well, what's the problem here is probably a really a good way to get into some fulfilling work, I'd say.
And I'm sure there's
This
lots of.
was
Oh, you
part
go,
of the
Carl.
reason I asked the question, though, too. That broad and general direction we're traveling, capabilities, all those kinds of things, versus the rush to be competent and to be an expert. And I think I think if you're going to talk about patterns that I think I see in records management all the time, it's that we do rush to judgment. We solve the problem we're comfortable with solving because we're trying to operate out of a sort of complicated problem paradigm where we are an expert and we see the world like an expert, which means that we often don't do a good enough assessment of the context we're dealing with. And they're complex problems with value judgments. And, if our value judgments aren't aligned, we go off in the wrong direction.
Totally. So just to your point, Michael, so in terms of thinking about what's the problem we're trying to solve and why you need to validate that, and I'd be interested to hear from you where you see the crossover with what I'm going to say is one problem I see is people trying to throw technology at something that's not a technology problem.
Oh, yes,
So your
absolutely.
business users or maybe even technical users, and they're trying to throw technology at it just because technology is flash, or it's easier to deal with technology rather than to deal with another person, right?
We can ping it. It's up. Fantastic. Job done.
Yeah, because the danger is addressing the problem that's been stated to you, not the problem that actually exists. What's the problem we're actually trying to solve?
I did an industry, just very quick. I did a sort of industry interview for something yesterday, and they were asking about what are your favorite what are the tools that you rely on most, and your favorite tools or something like that, and thinking they're going to get some kind of data management or records management tool or something like that. Honestly, 5 whys every time. The number of times we solve the superficial problem and then it does this great big long loop back and creates lots of carnage along the way. I think it's impossible to overstate the value of something like simple like 5 whys.
Totally.
A slightly different thing I think of when thinking about that thing of throwing a technology solution at something that's not a technology problem is also that in the course of fixing something that is a technology problem, not identifying the other opportunities or the other things that could change. And a classic one for us in an information space would be, yes, we show up and yes, we care when there's a system change and there's migration and there's, conversations around that. There are so many other things that could be tackled if uh, people on the technical side weren't just going, oh, well, look, we just want to move all the stuff so that we can turn the old thing off. Or look, we just want to turn the old thing off in place. And, oh, well, can't we just sort of, chuck this in the deep freeze and then we'll carry on. Yeah, whereas obviously, there's that real chance to say, oh, well, actually, we want to kind of prune and shape and even restructure the information level as part of just trying to improve on that current state.
Totally
Yeah.
agree. One of the key things I think you need to do as an architect is help sort of frame the problem or sort of craft the direction. To Carl's point about setting the direction, sometimes setting the direction is about identifying the problem that you're going to solve. Because typically there's a spectrum where at one end you could do something quite localized and tactical, but at the other end, if you do the 5 whys, it might be that the fifth why means that to fix that you need to boil the ocean. And clearly you don't have the time or resources to boil the ocean, but you don't want to go to the other extremes. You have to sort of find somewhere else in the middle. So part of the job is trying to figure that out and trying to convince the business users, well, this is what you've stated your problem is, but there's all this other stuff going on, and in terms of the enterprise architecture and the technical strategy, that's the direction they're going. There's these other changes happening over here which you might not be aware of. So a lot of it's just sort of bringing information together and bringing people up to speed and trying to inform decisions because you're back into that trade-off land and just trying to make good trade-offs so that you're tackling a good part of the problem, so you're making some progress even if you're not getting to the fifth why.
And it sounds like it's the balance between two constraints. It's what's the problem versus what's possible, and how do you find a sort of happy optimum. And I mean, I think that's a skill we need to learn, particularly in records management, because I think that we often mistake what we want to do for what's possible. And I think we fail to achieve really good results because we're trying to get to perfect results. And I mean, it kind of ties back to that question early on about maturity and, how you work through some of those things.
Yeah. So there's a couple of related concepts in software engineering, cohesion and coupling. And I think one of the key jobs of an architect is you want to manage coupling, meaning you want to avoid tight coupling as much as possible. So let's say you've got a system and it's feeding information into another system. If there's nothing sitting in between them and they're tightly coupled, then you can have situations where a change to one system forces a change onto the other system. And that's inherently bad architecture on the basis that it's just more brittle and harder to maintain. So I don't know quite what you could do as a records manager or as an information specialist, but if you could, I guess, just remember in the back of your mind that you want to try and avoid tight coupling where possible. The thing that you'll get if you manage that is you'll avoid painting yourself into a corner. Because if you can do that, well, then the pathway's open for down the track. So if we looked at the 5 whys and we decided we can only just tackle a small part of the problem, but if we did it in a way where we didn't paint ourselves into a corner, it leaves the path open to then do those future, those other stages, later on in the future if time and material becomes available.
For me, some of that is about making sure that we're all agreed on the models that we're using of the particular domain that we're working in. So are we all talking about the same kind of thing, and do we understand it in the same way so that we can describe it and make relationships between it and something else in the same way?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, very key. It's funny. Sorry, I just remember back in my developer days, you would see architects come in and they'd draw something on the whiteboard, and it would be like 3 boxes. It would be the most rudimentary diagram you've ever seen, and you'd go, "What? It's taken you an hour to explain that." Like, it just seems like such a no-brainer. It was so obvious. But what you don't see is you haven't seen the 3 months of wrangling in the background.
Right.
Like, it's only
Right.
3 boxes, but
Yeah.
it's the right 3 boxes out
Yeah.
of
Yeah. Yeah.
300,
Yeah. I'm with
and they've
you.
put together it in the right way. So I think,
And
what
it's
you've
the 3 boxes we can get done here.
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah. No, we all know what these 3 boxes are and how they relate to
Yeah.
each
We
other.
put them on the
Good.
board. Now they are the 3 boxes.
Yeah.
I know. And I've had moments where I've come out of a meeting or a workshop, and you're sort of writing up the post-mortem, this is what we discussed kind of thing, and there's the diagram, and it's the screenshot of the whiteboard, and it'd be very, very simple, but you'd be like, but everyone's on the same page, everyone understands that this is what we're doing, and it's such a milestone.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
That's something I really have noticed from remote working too. I mean, the organisation I'm working for at the moment, I'm based in Adelaide, and the rest of my team is based in Sydney. And I get up to Sydney about once a month for a couple of days. And honestly, the entire value of it is just being able to whiteboard stuff with people. We just build shared understanding about concepts and
Yeah.
tease out areas of ambiguity or multiple interpretations so much faster than we ever have been able to on Teams calls. It's one of those things that
Yeah.
it's a
Totally
skill that
right.
I'd love to learn to do it remotely.
Yeah, you can do it remotely, but it's so much, as you say, so much faster, and just you get that understanding with people because you're really eyeballing them and looking to see that you are on the same page. Definitely better.
And you can see them. There's not a room full of 10 people
Exactly.
there with their cameras off.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Cool. Alrighty. I reckon that's a very nice. I can't even say my words. Hey, that's a really nice place to wrap it up, I reckon. If I can get my words out. So thanks heaps, Adrian, for coming along. And we were just discussing off mic that it'd be great to continue this and do some more. So if anyone out there is listening and you have questions for these mysterious IT architects, then please jump in, or obviously share your thoughts as well. And we'll catch you again soon. Cheers.
Bye for now.